Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Missing Middle Housing Solutions, Proven Techniques to Deliver Impactful Small-Scale Housing, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in partnership with the Smart Growth Network and Island Press. My name is Andrew Wilson. I serve as the Government Affairs Specialist at the Maryland Department of Planning, which also serves as an active member of the Smart Growth Network Steering Committee. The Smart Growth Network is a national alliance of advocates, practitioners, policymakers, and local leaders working towards a shared vision for land use and infrastructure policies and actions that result in healthy, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous communities for all. In addition to hosting webinars, we provide information on effective planning, development, and preservation practices. The Smart Growth Network website is undergoing a transition, so please stay tuned for updates. Today's webinar is one in a series of webinars hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning on sustainable growth and planning-related topics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with past webinars for viewing via the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov or by visiting our YouTube channel. Our website also provides valuable information on statewide planning initiatives, tools, and educational opportunities, including information on future webinars. We encourage you to subscribe to our e-newsletter to learn more about our upcoming programs. It is important to note that the views expressed by the speaker today are those of the speaker and not necessarily those of the Maryland Department of Planning, the state of Maryland, or the Smart Growth Network. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association. To receive your credits, please visit the APA's website, planning.org, to log into your account and search for the name of today's event. You can also search for event number 930-1164. Following the presentation, we will address as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question at any time by opening the Q&A tool in the Zoom control panel. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today. Daniel Perolik is an urban designer, an architect, author, and the founding principal of Opticos Design, a B corporation focused on equitable urban placemaking, innovative housing design, and policy and zoning reform for walkable urbanism. Dan and his work have been featured in many high-profile publications, including the New York Times, Next City, the Wall Street Journal, and Curbed. He has championed the missing middle housing movement, launched missingmiddlehousing.com, and wrote the book Missing Middle Housing: Thinking Big and Building Small to Respond to Today's Housing Crisis, which is now available from Island Press. As a thought leader in zoning reform efforts to remove barriers for walkable urbanism, Dan co-authored the book Form-Based Codes, a guide for planners, urban designers, municipalities, and developers, with Karen Perolik and Paul C. Crawford named one of Plantagen's best books in 2009, and co-funded the nonprofit think tank, the Form-Based Code Institute. Dan works with municipalities nationwide to reform planning policy, design, and development to enable missing middle housing. Notable projects include a citywide form-based code for Cincinnati, Ohio, a sustainable growth strategy for Libreville, the capital city of Gabon, Africa, a form-based code for downtown Mesa, Arizona, and the citywide missing middle housing plan for Sacramento, California, that includes a displacement risk analysis process. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dan. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today, Dan.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and thanks to the Maryland Department of Planning and the Smart Growth Network for hosting me today. This is actually now the third webinar that I've done through this platform, and I'm thrilled to be back, and thank you for attending today. I think at a very sort of basic level, the conversation that's now happening nationally related to missing middle housing and housing choice, and really just every municipality, large and small, trying to deal with a crisis level of housing cost, is really at the basic level about making what should be simple solutions like this cottage court that we designed legal and easy to implement to respond to the needs and the desires of American households. And The concept of missing middle housing is now 13 years old. So I also feel that it's extremely important that we reflect on lessons learned from well-intended strategies that maybe have fallen short, what's worked, what hasn't, and also thinking about, instead of just thinking about applying missing middle kind of on a lot by lot or even neighborhood by neighborhood scale, due to the extent of the housing crisis, really feeling that we need to be thinking about applications of missing middle housing at a regional and even a statewide scale. And you're seeing that also happening across the country, which is super exciting to see. And I think if you're going to go away from this webinar with one big idea, I think this is really it. I want people, as they're learning more about missing middle and learning how to communicate about it and effectively build support for it, that instead of speaking in terms that might get people a knee-jerk negative response or not really resonate with people, is to talk specifically about these range of missing middle typologies. Use these names: the cottage court, the duplex, the small multiplex. And these are the types of sort of communication and messaging that we have found to be super effective, in contrast to like increasing density or upzoning a neighborhood. And so I think this is the one big message I'm hoping you all will take away today. So I wanted to start just with a really short refresher. I'm sure most of you are fairly familiar with this idea, but I do see, as I'm seeing it being applied across the country, some misunderstandings. And so I'm just going to go back to the definition as a refresher. And I think this is important, that missing middle housing are house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. And that house scale is just as important as the number of units. And we often see that house scale being missed in this conversation or the implementation. And this image here is just a great one that I often use. You've probably seen it in past presentations if you've seen me present that. Just reinforces this idea of what house scale is intended. It's a specific height, right? Typically 2 to 2.5 stories. It's a specific maximum width along the street and a maximum depth into the lot. So it looks and behaves much like a medium to large size single family home, but it actually has multiple units in it. In a lot of instances like this one, you can't even tell that it's not a single family home. And I'm going to say that the message isn't that bigger buildings are not needed. It's often the case, and you'll see in a few of my case studies and some of my topics today, that buildings just slightly larger than missing middle are often necessary. But at that point, when they're no longer house scale, they shouldn't be clustered into the missing middle classification. And there's really important reasons for that. And for today's presentation, I wanted to really focus on specific solutions. And there's solutions that are needed within the private sector, developers and builders across the country, and I'll touch on those. But I'm going to start with public sector solutions that are being implemented across the country. The other thing that my team and I really think about and talk about a lot and spend some time working on is that as we're learning through application and implementation, is learning how to expand and refine the missing middle messaging and application and the tools we're using. And so I wanted to share some of those high-level refinements and concepts with you today so that you all can utilize them for successful implementation as well. And the first sort of concept that I want to just continue to reinforce is this idea and this classification of what we call upper missing middle housing. And if you look at the missing middle diagram, outside, basically to the far right here, outside of the core missing middle housing types, there's the 3 and the 4-story buildings before you get to the larger block scale buildings. And we classify, and we're working on expanding this diagram as upper missing middle housing. And there's still stick construction, which is really important in terms of the delivery. But in chapter 5 of my book, there is actually one spread. I wish there was more, but one spread committed to introducing the concept of missing middle housing. And I think this diagram does a really great job, where the left-hand blue building, where it's 2 stories, house scale is really core missing middle. And the point at which you're planning and zoning efforts require buildings to be bigger, that I mean, three to four stories deeper on the lot. That's where you start to use this classification of upper missing middle. And you really do, in terms of not confusing these bigger buildings with the house scale missing middle, need to be thinking about different future land use classifications and different zoning districts to deliver these upper missing middle housing types. And this is just a great photo of an upper missing middle type. This one's in particular from a neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. And why might upper missing middle be needed? I think this is a really nuanced approach that we feel is very important. Sometimes when you're running the pro forma analysis on a missing middle sort of planning, policy, and zoning strategy, you might actually need bigger buildings or more rentable or for sale square footage to make the projects pencil out. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. There might be areas in your community where bigger buildings that are sort of slightly larger than missing middle, but still not that block scale, makes sense, like areas that transition from larger mixed use corridors with 5-6+ story buildings or around transit oriented developments as they transition into historically single family neighborhoods. And I think just generally, this is a great way for cities, region, and even states to broaden the palette and the catalog of housing choices that they're delivering to households. The second topic that I want to introduce is incremental missing middle housing. And this is something that often comes up is in our initial efforts to introduce missing middle housing, like at missingmiddlehousing.com. And in my book, we introduced this catalog of typologies. And it's not the assumption that in every instance that an existing building is going to get torn down or there's opportunity to start from scratch with one of those typologies. There's just as much opportunity in cities of all sizes across the country in rural and urban contexts for lots with existing buildings on them. And sometimes that's a single family home. Sometimes it might be a duplex, to incrementally evolve and accommodate multiple units on a site. And this is just one example. And this was done through our work with AARP's Livable Communities technical assistance, where we're just simply illustrating how a corner lot in this instance, with a single family home and a detached garage, can evolve over time to accommodate first an attached ADU that connects. You can see it on the orange in the middle that attaches the single family home at the front with the garage. And then the second step might be the accommodation of an AD, accessory dwelling unit, above the garage at the rear of the lot. And we see this as an opportunity that will likely happen just as often as sort of the introduction of a new missing middle typology that's in our catalog. The third concept that I wanted to sort of introduce is adaptable missing middle housing. And I posted this slide on LinkedIn several months ago, and it got a tremendous amount of response. I think 30,000 people sort of either liked or responded to this. And I think this is just a really great example of how this is a fourplex. You can see the left-hand slide, the numbers represent the different units, a pretty standard sort of 2 units on the upper floor and 2 units on the ground floor. And what the fourplex does is it introduces, or a duplex or a triplex, the path to home ownership in places where single family ownership is out of reach, which is more and more of the country, and thinking about accommodating a multi-generational living as well. And so you can see, right, a young couple, or sometimes it might be a baby boomer couple downsizing, might buy a fourplex and use one of the units to accommodate themselves and then rent out the others for passive income. In the middle, the owner might combine 2 of the units for a larger unit, like maybe they have a growing household where they're having children, or maybe children are moving back in with them. And there's still 2 other paths of passive income with the other 2 units. And then and then the third phase is just simply going back to 4 smaller units. Maybe the grandparents move into one of the units. So that this image in the process just simply demonstrates that the fourplex, if we can think creatively about enabling it, financing it, and selling this, can be a great path to homeownership and can provide a lot of flexibility to accommodate a household as their lifestyle needs change over time. And then the fourth and last concept I wanted to introduce is multi-generational living and co-living. And these types of sort of lifestyle choices are ones that more and more American households are choosing. Sometimes the households are actually needing to do it for financial reasons, but for both of those reasons, we need to be thinking about how a broad range of these missing middle typologies might accommodate that desired lifestyle. And this is just an image of a unit that a 3-unit building that has a core house at the front for the core family. It has what we call grandma's wing, which is a small studio apartment that does have its own kitchenette in the middle, and then the boomerang or young adult unit in the back, and they can all sort of live in a shared environment or close their units off for desired privacy levels. And so I think all of these concepts are really important to be thinking about in terms of application of missing middle housing and how we're communicating about it to our community members, to our decision makers, and to builders in our communities. I think before I jump into the case studies, I wanted to talk a little bit about across the public sector case studies, there is a certain amount of shared best practices and techniques across what we're seeing as the most effective solutions that I wanted to talk about. And so I'm going to first talk about these shared techniques. And what we are seeing is that you can't assume that the application of missing middle housing is one-dimensional, or that you can simply copy from the jurisdiction and their solution next door or apply it across a city in a way without analyzing your city and the conditions first of all. And so I think that's just really important to understand, is that the applications that are most successful are fairly nuanced and are thoughtful in their application. I think ensuring place-based solutions is a really critical part of our practice and our missing middle application. And one of the things that we do at the beginning of all of our processes is a very thorough analysis of the existing physical policy and planning conditions within a city. And this is just a series of layers of the analysis that was done for our citywide missing middle housing strategy for Sacramento, California, that I'm going to dive into a little bit deeper. But we're looking at layers such as existing land uses, connectivity and walkability to amenities and services, and the built form patterns like block sizes, lot sizes, building footprints. And we have a very refined process to use that analysis in a way to inform the definition of different context types and different applications of missing middle based on that analysis. And I think the second aspect of analysis that is critically important for missing middle, and probably most important, is understanding the typical lot widths and different that exist throughout the different places of your city. This once again is from Sacramento, and what we have found in this particular instance, we're looking for the most common lot sizes, in particular lot widths, in the targeted R1, R1A, R1B, and R2 zones. And we're able to identify the most common lot sizes, and those are the ones that we're going to use to vet and test some of the zoning changes and policy levers that we're going to change. And why this lot size is important is in all this information that we've made available for free over the years on missingmiddlehousing.com and through my book about the missing middle types, always ties the building types back to typical lot sizes. And so when you understand the most common existing lot sizes, you can start to plug in what types would be most applicable to the areas that have a certain range of lot sizes. And this is a new diagram that we created about probably within the last year now, after several recent missing middle citywide applications. And we call this the missing middle sweet spot. And we find that it's it is a challenge, and it takes a very nuanced approach to find this missing middle sweet spot where feasibility, attainability, and livability overlap. But we feel it is important to be thinking about all three of those when you're thinking about an effective missing middle strategy. And let me just talk a little bit about the three of these. First of all, in terms of feasibility, we use this process called the missing middle test fits, where we take those typical lot sizes and we apply a range of potential hypothetical build-out solutions using a catalog of missing middle types. And then those test fits are used to plug into a pro forma analysis to identify whether or not a particular hypothetical solution is feasible, whether it will deliver attainable rents or for sale prices, and then also what type of livability will be delivered. And you can see within those purple boxes, it's a bit of a scorecard of the feasibility and attainability performance of these test fits. And this was done for a project we did for the city of San Jose, California. And I think what we're seeing is it's often a challenge to incentivize what we call the in-between, or these core missing middle types. And it takes a very sort of nuanced understanding of zoning paired with the feasibility to get to the delivery of these core missing middle types, especially in higher value markets. And on the left, you see there what we call the slot homes or tuck under townhouse, which is a really the most likely build out that will happen if you allow it. And so we're trying to sort of make sure that a broader range of more livable, more attainable housing choices can be delivered through this process. In terms of attainability, this is some information from one of our partners, Cascadia Partners, through our Sacramento process of understanding what level of attainability and to what percentage of AMI, or average median income, different solutions will deliver to. And so it's really, really important to do this type of analysis and understand as you're testing those test fits is, are you achieving the level of attainability that you desire in your housing or missing middle housing strategy. And then the last one is livability, and livability out of the three within the missing middle sweet spot is the one that is a bit more subjective. But for us, livability is important. It's not just about delivering more housing for housing's sake. And I feel like you can be thoughtful about it and make sure you're delivering livability without introducing barriers for the delivery of missing middle housing. And I think this is just, I'll talk a little bit more about some of these images from our Sacramento missing middle study. Some other miscellaneous techniques is not stopping at good policy. We worked on the Memphis 3.0 comprehensive plan, and the city led by John Zena, the planning director, immediately hired us to do a follow-up series of 7 neighborhood plans that tested, vetted, and provided further recommendations for implementing the missing middle policy that was inherent in the plan Memphis 3.0 comprehensive plan. And so the second miscellaneous tip, which seems pretty straightforward, but I would say that a lot of cities don't do this, and I think it's absolutely necessary to begin to visualize the intent of your missing middle strategies, because this is what it will take to build support and build understanding from community members, right? Because there will be concerns, there will be valid concerns, and this is really necessary to effectively communicate the intent of your efforts through your missing middle planning and zoning. And then last of all, efforts should always include and end with zoning changes. If you've watched me present over the years, this is a slide I've been using for about at least 15 years, where the camera image on the left there is from approximately the same year that Euclidean zoning was created. And so our zoning system is absolutely an out-of-date operating system that needs to be replaced with something more modern and more effective at delivering a more sophisticated range of housing choices. And I'll say that it only takes one wrong zoning metric to make a zoning district ineffective. And I feel that this should really be an economic development incentive, this type of zoning reform, but unfortunately it rarely is. And then just last of all, as related to zoning, is you can be direct about what missing middle types you want in your zoning. The image on the far right is my form-based code book that Andrew mentioned in my intro. It's now 17 years old, but it's still as relevant as ever. And some of the case studies in our form-based codes, like this one from Cincinnati, you'll see that within the zoning district, and this one's called neighborhood small footprint, the table in the middle demonstrates that we just directly introduce an allowed range of missing middle typologies within that zoning district. So instead of regulating a maximum density, a floor area ratio maximum, a lot coverage maximum, and hoping that there's a good solution, we're just doing a really direct allowance of the range of typologies that are desired in that zoning district. So then now I'm going to jump into the public sector solutions. And the first one I want to introduce is an effort that we established within Opticos to be quick and direct about recommendations for enabling and allowing missing middle. This is a process we call the missing middle scan and the deep dive. And this is a process with the scan that can be done in approximately 2 to 3 months. For up to a medium-sized city. For a larger city, it might take a little bit longer. And then the deep dive take a supplemental a couple more months. But with this process, it's what we call the diagnosis before the surgery. We realize that we can be most impactful by collaborating with cities doing the analysis and making a set of really specific recommendations, and then letting the city staff implement them and calling us back in only as needed for strategic advising. And so this streamlined missing middle process, we've done it in cities all across the country. There's a number of these also in place or in progress that are on this list. South Carolina, North Carolina, Idaho, Tennessee, California, Georgia, and New Hampshire. So it is applicable pretty much anywhere, any type of town. And so this a quick summary of what this process does. First of all, it frames the local conversation about missing middle housing effectively and visually. Basically, it introduces the vocabulary. We have now, as I mentioned, over a decade of research, analysis, and visualization examples that we can bring to the table to help introduce the concept effectively and to begin to build support for the idea at the beginning of this process. Second of all, we create what we call the missing middle housing priority map, which establishes a priority and ideally at a policy level where missing middle housing should and could be applied. And in Greenville, South Carolina, this was actually used as a supplement to their future land use plan. And we think that that's actually a really great way to have this work supplement your comprehensive or your general plan. The third thing that it does is a really deep dive into zoning policies within your comprehensive or general plans, and then all of the policy and regulations within area plans, and a very thorough vetting of where within those documents are there barriers for missing middle housing, or where it might be a little bit unclear, or which of them those aspects are not barriers. Fourth of all, we graphically test the zoning. So we work with the city staff to pick usually 3 to 4 different residential zoning districts that are intended to deliver missing middle. We illustrate on the left the maximum building envelope, in the middle what the regulations actually allow or encourage, which is often different than what the intent of the zoning district is. And the third aspect is ideally what this zoning district would allow, and then backing into a set of recommended changes that would get get the city to the delivery of missing middle in those zoning districts. And let me just give you an example of the types of things we often find this is in a city where they had a medium density zoning district called RM20 that hypothetically allowed 20 units per acre. But when we actually tested this on the most typical lot size, which was a 60-foot by 200-foot lot within this zoning district, it only, if you developed a single family project, the side setbacks were 5 feet. But if you developed a multifamily project, the site setbacks went up to 15 feet. And so there was only 10 feet of development potential left within this zoning district on the most typical lot size. And so obviously that's a large barrier that needs to be changed in addition to a lot of the other barriers in the zoning district. And then last of all, the process gives very detailed set of recommendations and fixes. It's like basically a checklist for the city staff to take to go into their comprehensive plan, to go into their zoning code, and to actually implement this. And a lot of times they can do this on their own. Sometimes they ask us for some advising or peer review. But the idea is to build the capability internally within the staff to understand it and to implement it. And so second of all, in terms of public sector solutions, our efforts in implementation have really jumped up to the citywide and the regional scale. And so I want to talk a little bit about a couple examples of the citywide solutions, and starting with the Sacramento Missing Middle Housing Plan, which was recently adopted through an interim ordinance. But basically, the primary objectives were to implement some of the city council driven policy to promote greater housing choices. They really wanted the efforts to focus on Sacramento specific solutions. And then third of all, they wanted to be thinking about how can the city take more local control over outcomes. And so the state of California has been passing a lot of really great progressive housing legislation, but the city really wanted to get ahead of that and be even more progressive and nuanced in the missing middle housing strategy that they were to implement. These are the primary documents, the 4 documents that informed the process. It's basically an informational report, a displacement assessment toolkit, the attainability and livability analysis, and then the information. Sorry, the last one is the recommendations. I apologize, that's actually the wrong cover. But I'll leave a PDF of extracted slides from this presentation and provide links to these case studies so you don't have to search for them on your own after the presentation. So this process involved an extremely robust public engagement process. I would say that one of the differences between this and like the missing middle scan, the missing middle scan is really an analysis process that produces a set of targeted recommendations that then are taken and introduced in a public engagement process. But a process like this citywide strategy for Sacramento introduced and involved a very robust public engagement strategy. And we worked with Bill Leonards on strategy and a really great local team led by Rashawn Davis and his team at Unseen Heroes to make sure that we were effectively reaching an audience that doesn't historically come to the table or hasn't been reached across Sacramento. And you can see these posters in the middle were what we call the Missing Middle Roadshow, which was a series of posters introducing the concepts initially, where the missing middle exists within Sacramento. And then there were new posters at the end about what the recommendations were and what results they would show. Analysis was at the foundation of the recommendations. Like I suggested earlier, there was an extensive assessment of lot sizes across Sacramento. And you can see in this process, there's a real added challenge for a city at the size of Sacramento of how do you distill and simplify and make this information helpful in informing the missing middle solutions. In this instance, we began to categorize the lots in extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large, in starting to tie those to types. We identified the most common lot sizes sort of thinking about which types are applicable in those lot sizes. And then in addition, all of the analysis we did at the beginning helped us identify 6 different context types throughout Sacramento, and understanding how those characteristics might inform the missing middle application at the end of this. So how does that context types tie into the missing middle housing implementation? You can see on the right-hand side for each context type, we asked 2 questions, which is number 1, which of the missing middle types or range of types work best in those contexts based on the characteristics we've extracted and understood. And then second of all, which household types would typically choose to live there, and how can we best accommodate those lifestyles of those households? The next thing we did is just, which is a common component of all of our processes, really jumped in and identified all of the zoning and development standard barriers. We looked at 5 different zoning districts. This was the R1, R1A, R1B, and R2. We also looked at this, they had some special use regulations for multi-unit dwellings. And then we also looked at different titles within the city's municipal code as well. So it was a pretty comprehensive process. Cascadia Partners led a really extensive effort of assessing and understanding displacement risk analysis and how it can inform which levers we might pull in terms of policy and zoning, and ensure that we can minimize, if not eliminate, the amount of existing residents that will be impacted by the decisions that are being made by the city. That was a really, really important goal for the city leaders in this particular process. And I really feel that every missing middle effort that's being done at scale should have this displacement assessment analysis component. And then after all that analysis, we basically testing potential solution, and we do these, what I mentioned, the test fits before, what types can go on different lot sizes, and then plugging that into the pro forma analysis for feasibility, attainability, and livability. What was great about Sacramento is that Cascadia was able to do pro forma analysis of various potential scenarios across different neighborhoods, because different neighborhoods were performing very differently based on desirability or existing land or home prices. And so you can see on the diagram on the right, each of the dots represents a different neighborhood and how the types might perform differently in different neighborhoods. And what this also allowed us to do, what you can see in the green box, is to identify this 4-rent fourplex with 4 ADUs was identified as one of the best performing models and test fits that we did in the process. So in terms of recommended solutions, there were really targeted and specific regulatory changes that we suggested and illustrated and communicated about in terms of the built form. Through the public engagement, we used a series of drawings to illustrate some of the different components that were being considered and integrated into the process. And it's everything from early on in this process, there was a big concern from community members that the tree canopy might be impacted. And so you can see here being able to illustrate that you could still get a decent tree canopy and enable this fourplex with 2 ADU solution. And another really cool strategy that's demonstrated in orange here is that there was a bonus for a certain percentage of the main street-facing facade could encroach into the front setback in exchange for basically what we would call a more engaging frontage. In this instance, it's a porch facing the street edge. And then once again, the power and the effectiveness of visualizing what the solutions would be. This is actually an existing corner lot of a specific site in a specific neighborhood. And we were able to talk a lot about the benefits of this and how it's being thoughtful and why it's delivering choices. So what we discovered in Sacramento, as we do in a lot of markets where there's higher land values or higher land prices, is that additional incentives are needed to shift what's getting delivered away from just single family homes. And you can see on the left-hand side, the typical condition where the single family home on the right, because of the ease of financing, lower build costs, lower fees, that the scale is often tipped to making the delivery of single family homes the most logical and simple thing to do, even though a zoning district may allow more units. But we're trying to get to the condition on the right in this process and thinking about how to make missing middle housing just as easy. And so one of the things we did to do that is we introduced, sorry, I just want to, this idea of a sliding scale FAR, and I'll just say that we learned from and studied the Portland, Oregon effort that did exactly this, because this disincentive as an existing condition where if you allow the same FAR across all build-out solutions, because of the added complexity and cost that I mentioned earlier, the single family home is actually the most attractive project that delivers the highest rate of return for developers. So to counter that, we sort of asked the question of what if the more units you deliver, you can see here on the bottom in the red, the more units you get, the higher the allowed FAR. So the fourplex has an allowed maximum FAR of 1, and then a single family dwelling unit has a maximum FAR of 0.4. And you can see that what this does is it makes this fourplex solution have the highest rate of return out of all the potential solutions. It's not allowing the single family dwelling or maybe the duplex, but it's delivering the fourplex, which will deliver a higher level of attainability that is desired within this process. And so we also introduced a local bonus program for projects that are 2 to 4 units, which is just below the 5-unit project that triggers the state density bonus. And this is still being worked on, but the concept is if a builder developer introduces a deed restricted affordable units that might be deed restricted for 10 plus years, there's added FAR and lot coverage that's given to incentivize the delivery of that deeper affordability that's desired. And I'll just say as an outcome, the interim ordinance was adopted on September 17th unanimously, which was really exciting to see. And the city of Sacramento is actually now accepting applications for the implementation of this missing middle effort. Jumping from Sacramento, I just want to mention that a lot of the comprehensive plans that we have plugged into over the years, including Memphis, Kauai County, and Plan Cincinnati, had missing middle enabling policies. Just encourage you to take a look at those. And all 3 of these are winners of the National APA Burnham Award. So just great plans, all of missing middle enabling and just different types of contexts I encourage you to take a look at. We're currently just wrapping up a project with the city of Louisville that's utilizing the story mapping platform, the ArcGIS story mapping. I think this is a really great sort of tool to enable people easy access to missing middle and other more generalized housing policy and planning. And I'm not going to talk about this extensively, but if you just Google Louisville, Kentucky, and story map, this will come up, and I'll provide a link for that afterwards as well. But this process identified priority areas for housing as well as mixed-use development, and it analyzed, like we did in our other projects, including lot sizes and other development patterns, and then it did the test fit process as well. That is illustrated in the story map platform. And it's just a really great way to establish a very accessible information that can be also more long-lasting and directly tied to the city's future missing middle planning efforts as well. There are also efforts related to pre-approved plans and pre-approved ADUs that we've been working on. Jennifer Settle, who runs Opticos's Chicago office, worked with a team to create the South Bend pre-approved plans that have already delivered some really excellent results. Just encourage you to take a look at that. And We also have worked recently on several ADU projects, including the Tucson, Arizona pre-approved ADU program, which is really exciting, a way to incentivize the delivery of ADUs within a community. And also we've worked with several communities to create, in addition, sometimes we're doing the pre-approved and sometimes we're not, but these accessory dwelling unit guidebooks that actually walk a homeowner or a small builder through the process of designing, entitling, and building an ADU. And we're super excited about providing that information to really spread the delivery of more attainable housing and more choices through accessory dwelling units. Jumping quickly to some regional solutions before I jump to private sector. We were, I don't know, a little over a year and a half ago, we were hired by the Washington State Department of Commerce to create a shared regional missing middle zoning toolkit for the Puget Sound region. We were super excited to use the last 10 plus years of our citywide and regional experience, as well as our missing middle expertise, to look at this regional scale. This shared zoning toolkit could apply to 3 different counties and up to 82 jurisdictions optionally. Once again, the process starts with analysis, and with a regional approach like this, it's beginning to classify the different jurisdictions and municipalities into different place type categories and providing solutions that are applicable to each of those. There was a very robust set of educational resources in addition to the zoning toolkit. There were posters, there were videos, there were illustrations done. And the zoning toolkit has a basic version and a detailed version. So a city with a more limited planning staff and a desire to do something more simple but still effective would choose the basic application. And a city with maybe a bigger staff and an interest in a more detailed set of regulations would use the detailed version of the zoning toolkit. So we're also doing a similar process, super excited about this, through the Hawaii Community Foundation, island-wide in Maui County. And just take a look out for this. I'll provide a link to this as well, so you can keep following this. It's really just getting started on this, and super excited about being able to deliver much needed housing after the fires on the island of Maui. So then I'm going to just really briefly highlight a few private sector missing middle solutions and innovations. You've probably seen some of these before, but we're now at the point where there are complete missing middle neighborhoods that have and are being delivered. This is a project called Bungalows on the Lake that we master planned and did the architecture for in Papillion, Nebraska, which is the Omaha Metro, and done by my team at Opticos. And the numbers represent the number of units in the different buildings. So you can see this is duplex up to 8plex and delivering a really high quality living environment for its residents. It's 100% rental. Super interesting project. We actually evolved that process into what we call the Missing Middle Neighborhood Kit, where we're actually selling pre-designed licensed uses of those missing middle housing typologies. I'll provide a link, but you can also scan this QR code to go directly to this, or just Google Missing Middle Neighborhood Kit. We felt that this was just a really important way for us to enable our missing middle housing types to spread more broadly across private sector projects, and maybe in the future even public sector application of missing middle housing. And the most recent application and iteration of this is in Athens, Georgia, to a really neat community that's called the Shoals, that's going through entitlement right now, and it's 100% missing middle as well. So we also designed a really interesting project in Seattle. And Seattle did a really interesting thing where they allow ADUs, whether they're attached, detached, or embedded, to be sold separately from a primary unit. So you can see in this typology on the right, it has 2 units, which are townhouses, and then an attached ADU that basically makes a triplex. And the cool thing about this is it delivers a smaller unit that can be sold and achieve a really attainable price point for a household in this southern Seattle neighborhood. It's in a pocket neighborhood format. You can see a series of triplex and fourplex units clustered around a courtyard. And this is just the typology that on the right-hand side has a 3-story townhouse, and then the left-hand side has a 2-story townhouse over an accessory dwelling unit. And that accessory dwelling unit can either be sold with the townhouse above it, or it can be sold as a separate unit based on this allowance of Seattle to it being sold separately. The image behind me is a cottage court in Healdsburg, California called River House that we're really excited about. 8 single-family detached smaller units ranging inside from 1,200 to 1,700 square feet with 4 ADUs that were sold with 4 of the primary homes in this instance. City of Santa Maria, California removed density caps and introduced a form-based approach to their zoning in their downtown plan, and enabling us to design this 2 to 3 story courtyard housing project on a lot that's 80 by 72. And because this kind of blows people away, it's delivering 129 units per acre at 2 and 3 stories. And the reason it can do that is it's actually a micro unit project. And this kind of demonstrates why density is maybe not the right metric to be using, or an inconsistent metric to be using for the delivery of the broad range of choices we need to deliver. So a few closing thoughts. I'm a missing middle geek and a zoning geek through and through. Even when I'm playing Monopoly with my kids or my wife, I'm thinking about missing middle housing. And yes, missing middle housing is missing from Monopoly as well. If you go to opticosdesign.com, you can find 2 articles that I think are really, really good. The first one is the top 5 missing middle mistakes to avoid, and that was the topic of my previous webinar that the Smart Growth Network hosted. Still super relevant. And then more recently, I wrote an article, the top 10 tips for cities considering pre-approved plans. And I'll provide links to those post-presentation. We still need to keep in mind that planning and zoning are not the only barriers for missing middle, unfortunately. Building codes, because building code requirements jump from the residential building code between when you go up to the 3rd unit from the residential building code to the commercial building code, and it adds a lot of expense to a project that often makes missing middle infeasible. And that's why you see a lot of cities and now states working on changing this. Construction defect liability that makes it too risky for builders to deliver for sale missing middle is another barrier in many states. And then we just see a lot of well-intended efforts on cities or counties' part that still have barriers in place, like fees, impact fees, or the wrong metrics as well. And so in the future, I'm sure we're going to be talking about modular missing middle. It's something that we've been exploring over the last 3 to 4 years, and we'll continue to explore because we think it's an important way for quicker, more efficient delivery of missing middle. And with that, I look forward to jumping to the Q&A. If you're interested in buying my book, published by Island Press, they're providing a 30% discount if you use the code SMART. So please go to Island Press website and purchase the book. If you want to connect with me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, usually post 1 or 2 times a week. A lot of times it's missing middle related. Other times it's just more urbanist or urban placemaking related. So please feel free to reach out and connect on that front too. And with that, I'll stop sharing and jump into the Q&A.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate you joining us today, share your thoughts and expertise around these important housing issues and strategies. To all throughout the presentation, we have been assembling questions from the audience. Please continue to submit them as you get ideas or hear some of Dan's answers to the following questions. And we'll get to as many as we can. Our stop time's 2:30. There's a couple of small housekeeping items right before that 2:30 mark, so we'll probably wrap up Q&A around the 2:25, 2:27 mark. So with that, let's get started. Uh, Tim Staub asks, how do we get developers interested in missing middle? All the developments I see proposed are townhomes or single family homes, even when codes appear favorable to missing middle.
Yeah, I think that's a very common question. I think there's a three-prong answer there. I think first of all, that's one of the really great reasons to do this pro forma analysis as part of a city-driven or a public sector-driven process, so you can actually demonstrate to those local builders the potential for profit and the fact that they are feasible. So that's first of all, that's a really important part of that. Second of all, we find that the most effective way to engage the local building and development community is usually to hold specific meetings that are focused on why the developers should be interested in this, or sort of introducing them to missing middle and where it's happening in other cities and how other developers and other markets are responding. So that's the second. So it might be partnering with your local Urban Land Institute chapter, right? And helping bring the developers to the table, or NAHB's program. And I think the third aspect is basically demonstrating to them. The National Association of Realtors does, I think, a biannual survey, a preference survey. And when it came out last year, it demonstrated that over 50% of American households want non-single family housing choices, in particular in walkable locations. And so the data is now there to prove that this is desirable. It's needed to deliver attainability, but it's also desired by a majority of American households. And so I think the combination of that three-prong approach we have found is a really effective way to engage the local development community, because if they are only used to doing like single family detached houses, it is going to take a little bit of nudging, education, just back and forth to encourage them to do it. It's also like encourage a city to do a pilot project, a city-driven pilot project that demonstrates a viability.
Awesome. Next is from Justin Fair. He asks, are there regional or ecological tastes in home styles you've seen more successful or accommodated? He also adds that he loves your book, regularly cites your recognition of cottage court clusters as easy tiny house pocket neighborhoods.
And Andrew, can you ask that question again? I didn't quite catch it. There was some audio.
Oh, yeah. And stop me if the audio issues continue. It's Justin Fair, and he asks, are there regional or ecological tastes in home styles you've seen more successful or accommodated? And then he adds that he loves your book, and he regularly cites your recognition of cottage court clusters as easy tiny house pocket neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like there's a catalog of missing middle types that we have introduced that generally could apply to most regions based on whether the climate differences or but what we do see is there historically has been architectural variations that are specific to a specific region, or maybe the climate responsiveness in that region. And for example, if you're doing a courtyard housing project like the Santa Maria courtyard project that I showed from California, in a cooler climate, you'd probably want to do like a larger courtyard, and because of just wanting more sun to get into that courtyard. So there's definitely like regional variations that are needed. I would say that in terms of the market desires, just good design of the unit plans themselves, even though they might be a little bit smaller, has been critical. Sort of access to either a shared or private open space has been really critical in the function. And the other aspects that we find really critical is in the majority of our missing middle projects, every unit has its own door and has its own stoop, which people really like because they're not sharing a sort of long placeless corridor to get into their unit. And then the natural light is often just a really shared characteristic. There's often three walls of natural light on missing middle type. So I'll just stop there, but those are just a glimpse at some of the characteristics that might be shared or different across different applications and different places.
Right. Then there's two questions from two separate people, but they kind of both talk about house scale, so I'll combine them. The first is from Chris Ginnup. He asks, When you say missing middle is house scale, what do you mean by house scale? Just the size of the structure or setbacks and max lot occupancy? If setbacks, what do missing middle row homes look like? And then the other one comes from an anonymous attendee. How do you ensure in development standards that a structure is house scale?
Okay, so super basically, what house scale, there's a diagram in the book and on the website. It's a maximum width, which is usually no more than 45 to 50 feet in width along the street front. What we do find is when we're documenting local examples, sometimes there are local examples that go wider along a street, like in particular on corner lots, but let's just say 45, 50, maybe sometimes 60 feet along the street. It's 2.5 stories maximum, because we find that when you go up to a third and a fourth story, they stop looking and feeling like a house, and it's harder to make them compatible. And then the depth is, I can't remember what number, but I would say it's probably generally between 45, 50, maybe up to 60 feet in depth. The simplest way, and I don't know why there's such resistance to doing this, you can actually establish a maximum width and a maximum depth, as well as a maximum height directly in your zoning district. That is not tied specifically to the setbacks or the lot size. So that's the most direct way to do it, because if you start thinking about lot coverage, or like the rear setback works really well when all the lots are the exact same depth. But in a lot of cities, the depth of the lots, especially in historic neighborhoods, is inconsistent. So the second you get a deeper lot sitting next to a shallower lot, if you regulate from a rear setback, you're going to get a building that's way bigger and way deeper into the lot than the one next to it. And so that's why we encourage ideally a maximum building depth that's measured from the front property line, or a maximum depth into the lot from that front property line.
Awesome. Next comes from Milan Navajda. You stated upper missing middle housing are needed in higher value markets. Could you elaborate on what is considered a higher value market? Can we glean this from a comparison of typical construction costs versus sale value potential, or is this more focused on just the cost to build metric?
No, this really, what's the best way to answer this? The higher value markets, it can vary. I think that's why when we're running this, working with our partners like the Cascadias to run the pro forma analysis, we can very quickly identify, hey, that typical fourplex of 4 units at 1,100 square feet, it doesn't pencil out. So we got to be thinking about, well, are we going to add more height, more depth, more units generally, some ADUs to make that pencil out? And I would say that the core of most cities that are vibrant and desirable will probably necessitate looking at this upper missing middle solution. But I think the only way you can really tell is you're not going to be able to tell until you run the pro forma. I will say that every city we've worked in California, regardless of where it's at, even those outside of the Bay Area, have triggered the need for the upper missing middle, just based on where the values are. And so that's all I can really say in terms of specificity, is just need to do a quick back of napkin pro forma analysis really early on with just use a basic fourplex and see if that makes sense from a rental perspective or a for sale perspective. If not, then you have to start be thinking about a palette of broader upper missing middle. And what I would say is we are in the process of introducing that more in-depth catalog of that information on missingmiddlehousing.com.
Great. And then building on fourplexes, the next question is regarding them. I love the idea of a fourplex that can have multiple configurations as the needs of the owner change. Practically, if someone can't afford a single family home, what do you see as a path for this more expensive fourplex functioning as a path to home ownership?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the first thing is it's most likely to be effective in in an older pre-existing multiplex or fourplex, right? Because it's in a brand new construction, it's just inevitably or inherently going to be more expensive. So that's the most likely solution is a fourplex that's 20, 30, 40 plus years old. That's going to be more affordable. I think that cities also, though, should be thinking about mechanisms in which maybe they can provide some gap financing for first-time homeowners or homeowners that meet other criteria to fill a gap between even just down payments that are sort of required for the purchase of a fourplex. So I think we need to get creative about it. I don't have a specific solution to that. I think if what I have said in the past when this has come up is if anybody in this group that's on, participating wants to like do a deep dive into that economically in a certain market or in various markets, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Like I'd be happy to sort of work with somebody to really test that and suggest some solutions that can make that feasible for those homeowners that can't afford a single family home.
Great. Next comes from Waldo Carbo. In order to create these types of examples you're presenting, will single family zoning lots have to be rezoned, or are you proposing that the codes be rewritten to allow for multifamily in a single family lot? Or should we remove single family and multifamily zoning to combine them?
Great question. I would say that pretty much every city we've worked in and every city I've seen working on this might take a slightly different approach. Some cities, for example, might decide to do an overlay upon the single family zoning districts that keeps the base zoning. At the other extreme end, other cities might completely replace the single family zoning with a new zoning district. I think there's a lot of different options in between. It might be just sometimes we've been just very strategically going into the zoning districts and suggesting some targeted changes that allow for a broader range of maybe cottage courts that are still single family or some townhouse configurations that are still considered single family attached. So there's a lot of different nuanced ways that this can be done. And this is part of why I want to sort of start talking more specifically about solutions. And I'm hoping others that go through this process will share that information and assess it as well. The Portland's residential infill program, that sliding scale FAR, Cascadia, who was on our Sacramento team, was hired to assess the results of that after I think a couple years in place, and it was actually proving to be successful in incentivizing the delivery of multiplexes versus large single family homes that were historically being built. So it's also assessing and sharing that data of like what's working and what's not, or what could be improved. And what I would say is that every zoning code, even a brand new one, it should be considered a live document. It's not going to be perfect, and it should always be assessed and not changed to accommodate every single project, but thoughtfully refined as certain solutions come up that weren't thought of in the writing of the zoning that you think should be allowed more broadly, if a minor changes can be made to allow that.
Right. We got quite a few questions regarding parking. I'm sure that's not a huge surprise for your end of things, Dan. So to wrap a lot of them up, what are some general parking solutions you've seen when developing missing middle housing solutions? And then a more directed question from Daniel Ulatowski. Off-street parking is a large concern in his suburban community, which does not have on-street parking opportunities during November 1st to April 1st. And given a lack of public transportation in his area, residents really rely on automobiles or cars to make up the gap. How do you accommodate enough off-street parking in those kinds of circumstances?
Yeah, parking, I'm of the mindset that, and this isn't shared by every city necessarily. It's always a bit of a debate, but I feel like the best solution is to let the market determine how much parking, to don't require any parking. I really feel that's where we need to get to be successful in the delivery of missing middle, because what you'll see is, especially on existing infill lots. Missing middle is nearly impossible, even just geographically, to fit parking on a site with a multiplex. What I would say just generally is the other thing is the missing middle neighborhood Prairie Queen that I showed that aerial photo of is in a very suburban location. There's no public transit. It's a walkable neighborhood, but more broadly, everybody's going to need a car. And it's parked one off-street parking space per unit, and the rest of the parking happens on the street. And it's outperforming every other multifamily project financially in the region. So it's not impacting the viability. Nebraska gets snow, they get sleet, they get really cold weather. So like that's my reference point is like, if you have the ability to do on-street parking, one space should be a maximum if you need to provide that. In the context like was brought up by the second question of if you don't have on-street parking, it's going to be really, really hard, just to be pretty frank about it, because it's going to make it really hard to make it viable financially to try to accommodate all the needed parking on the site, because you're going to need a really big lot. And maybe in areas where the land values aren't that high, it's possible, but it is going to be really hard. And that's unfortunately just the reality. If you pick up, we did a publication on missing middle housing with AARP a couple of years ago that's downloadable. I'll provide a link to that in the follow-up as well. But it has a great section on parking. That's how to approach the parking conversation with your communities and decision makers in a very approachable way. Because I wouldn't start that conversation by saying we don't think there needs to be any parking. I think you do need to listen to people's concerns. Everybody's concerns are valid, but then you can actually talk about the financial implications of providing all that parking by when you're running those numbers and doing that pro forma analysis. You can actually say, well, what's the impact if we need 4 parking spaces on a lot? Is it even physically possible to do it? If it's physically possible, then how is that impacting how much those units need to either rent for or sell for to make that project make sense? And the other sad reality is what ends up happening is you get a super bad design solution that just lifts every unit on top of tuck under parking, right? And it just doesn't, and they end up not feeling very good. And so I encourage you to look at those, that section of the AARP document. I think that's a really good starting point, but also look at some of the case studies, the development case studies I mentioned today, and all of them were only viable because of reduced parking requirements or eliminated parking requirements. And actually, one of our projects that's under construction right now will be the largest car-free community in the country. It's called Cul-de-sac Tempe, and it's in Tempe, Arizona. But if you just Google Cul-de-sac Tempe, it's proving that there is a demand for even car-free living in a community or a region that has historically been very auto dominated. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but
no, and it matches. We got a lot of questions on parking, so I appreciate the thoroughness there. Moving on, and this might build on the answer you gave earlier to the fourplex question of ownership for a fourplex. But Karen Komkowicz asks, what strategies are there to ensure local ownership of missing middle housing? Are there funding mechanisms to help resident homeowners afford both to develop missing middle housing and purchase the entire missing middle structure? And then she adds, in Maui, much of our most stable, affordable housing is owner occupied, legally gray missing middle housing, whether multi-generational or rentals.
Yeah, those are all really good questions. I would say that I don't have great answers to all of them, but I feel that the missing middle concept is tenure neutral, meaning that some missing middle needs to be for rent, but there should also be for sale missing middle in every community. And I think part of the strategy is thinking about how, in terms of housing security, we can figure out how to enable the largest number of households to get into home ownership, although it's not going to be possible for all households, but as many as is reasonable for that long-term housing security. I would say there's not Look at if you go to the Sacramento, just Google Sacramento missing middle housing, and go to the documents and go to the document report number 4, and it gives Cascadia Partners outlines a whole catalog of potential tools that the city of Sacramento could look at to promote home ownership, to promote small scale local builders or even homeowners to be the ones delivering missing middle or delivering ADUs. We had a really robust conversation about that, and it was a priority for the city. What we are finding is that even simple things like streamlining ADU approvals and providing pre-approved ADU plans and eliminating the permitting fees for ADUs, all of a sudden that's really increasing the desire and the amount of ADUs from homeowners and smaller builders that are being delivered. Actually, that's the case across California, really.
Awesome. Ray Tamalti asks, could you talk more about the mechanisms linking missing middle housing to displacement and how this can be addressed by planners?
Yeah, and once again, it's not a simple process, and Cascadia Partners led that for us in Sacramento, and they have a data-driven process, and that's sort of built upon a scenario modeling system that they've created that assesses things like incomes, sort of vulnerability to displacement. So there's a layer of approximately like, I don't know, it's like 10 different layers of data that they're looking at. And those maps that I showed they looked a little bit like pixelated, but the pixels were like these very big sort of groupings of that data. And I just encourage you, once again, go to missing middle housing, Google missing middle housing Sacramento, go to the attainable risk assessment report, and you can do a deep dive into that. I would say that could be a 2-hour long conversation in and of itself. I said it's really, really important work. Cascadia is doing some of the best work in that front, and I do feel that more and more cities need to be doing that and figuring that out. There's no proven system to deliver perfect results in every city, but I think there are a number of people like Cascadia working toward that, and we're in total support of that and plugging that into our processes, and feel it is necessary to be thinking about those more vulnerable residents and how the decisions you're making may impact them, and thinking about ways to reduce or eliminate, ideally, the impact on those households.
Next, we have Leslie Carr asks, if not density, what is the right metric for measuring housing?
Yeah, I'm not sure why you need to measure, like you don't. The way we see density is it's a really good output, right? If you place a fourplex on a certain size of lot, you can calculate the density, right? But by starting with density as the starting point, it sort of delivers unpredictable results on basically based on the broad range of lot sizes. And so in Sacramento, what their general plan process did, which was happening in parallel, is they did a maximum FAR. And historically, I would have told you that I'm not a big fan of FAR, but I'm a fan of getting rid of densities and using maximum, floor area ratio, or FAR. And in addition to having a set of very specific desired form standards that supplement the maximum FAR, which is what the missing middle effort was doing. And so that's what's being used in Sacramento as the metric to measure housing output. And that can be plugged into scenario modeling. But we've also, through our form-based coding and planning efforts, have just done typology-based coding that just ties to a specific lot size, a range of lot sizes that can generate that metric. And I would like nothing more than for every city to just get rid of density, because what density does is it disincentivizes the delivery of smaller, more attainable units. Because if a developer does the math and the maximum density allows them to do 4 units, they're not going to deliver 4 small, attainably priced units. Are going to build 4 of the biggest units that the market will accept, and they're likely going to be expensive and at the upper end of the market. And so, one simple hack would be, if you're going to use density, to count any unit that's under like 750, 800 square feet as half a unit in that calculation. So all of a sudden you start to level the playing field, if you have to keep that density base system in place.
Awesome. Next, we have Vadila Satvika. She asks, would you have any thoughts regarding what the data shows for most effective MMH policy, i.e. best bang for our municipal buck? Does going to duplexes move the needle, or is there a threshold, i.e. triplex, quad, fiveplex, that is required to allow housing to really shift?
Here's what I know and will suggest is duplex is probably not enough. I haven't seen a duplex allowance be effective anywhere. Even, all this, at some point in missing middle planning and policy, 4 units became this magic number, that if we allow 4 units, then all of a sudden we're going to get a bunch of missing middle. And I think what you'll see is, in most places that just blanket did that, they're not getting a lot of missing middle, especially in places with higher value markets. So this is why I feel it's actually critical to do that analysis, that feasibility analysis, to understand, because you may need 6 units, but it might be 6 smaller units, right? To actually really get to results. And most of your small local builders or developers, and maybe even your local architecture community, can help with that process. But I would say, don't feel that even 4 is a magic number, and test it. Do this sort of testing. Pick some lot sizes. Yes, pick common lot sizes within your 3 or 4 residential districts where you want to allow it, and then have somebody run just a back of napkin pro forma analysis of, as a rental, would this make sense to do this? As a for sale project, would this make sense to do this? That, to inform that, because I really don't think there's a one size fits all solution. I think we've kind of got caught up in 4 being the magic number. And I'm afraid that cities get really excited when or even states get excited when they do that, but it's actually not enough in a lot of places. So.
Awesome. And then I think we have time for one more before we get into the closing side of things. Mia Linetto, and she captures part of the question that a few of our attendees asked, which boils down to, what recommendations or best practices do you have for rural environments interested in creating missing middle houses? And then there was quite a few attendees who also asked for suburban areas on top of rural. Milo specifically points out that she has a very small tourist town with very large growth problems, and a huge lack of housing year round for residents and people who want to live there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like part of my message, which, just to be a little bit more direct, is all those different types of places that were brought up in those questions probably need slightly different solutions or implementation techniques. Like, it might be, you could look at the spectrum of missing middle types, and some of those places may only be able to accommodate the left third, the other might be able to accommodate all. But so I think the only real recommendation I have is to find similar cities or counties that are doing the missing middle work, or ideally have done it, and assess what techniques they've used. You can start by going to opticoastdesign.com, seeing kind of what we have up. If there's information that's missing from some of those project descriptions, you can either go to the jurisdictions websites and try to find the full reports. But what I'll say is, like, it can absolutely apply to like rural conditions, like Maui, County is one example. We've done over 10 years worth of work on the island of Kauai, starting with their comprehensive plan that, a rural crossroads is like a little sliver of urbanism, right? That can be built upon, or a small village or a small town. We've done the similar thing in Beaufort County, South Carolina, with very rural conditions, and we're able to demonstrate how to effectively enable missing middle through planning and zoning. So I think the case studies are building. Most of them are pretty new, so maybe not in place long enough to truly vet success. We also completed I pulled it out of my presentation last minute because I already had too many slides, but it was we did a missing middle study for Teton County and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where they had identified a 200-acre opportunity site in their comprehensive plan, and they hired us to study it for viability for missing middle / workforce housing delivery. And it was a super complex process because working with, once again, with Cascadia partners, we had to demonstrate that to the two private property owners that the missing middle solution could actually be competitive financially for them, compared to a large lot estate house, which is the pattern that's happening in that resort community. And we were able to actually do that. So it's the Jackson South Park neighborhood plan, Northern South Park neighborhood plan from Teton County, Wyoming. It's a great example. So the case studies are growing. We're just going to need to continue to share lessons learned as we're finding things that didn't work and worked well in those applications.
Awesome. All right, since we're running up on 2:30, Dan, do you have any words of wisdom, guidance, parting thoughts for the group today?
Yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for joining. Sorry we didn't get to the 92 questions. The good
We would have been
news
here for a while.
that this is a topic everybody's interested in. I'm obviously very passionate about this and will continue to be an advocate for a very long time. So I guess a couple of suggestions is, if you haven't bought the book, I just encourage you. It's a very way, if you're just getting introduced to the topic of missing middle housing, go to Island Press. You could start at missingmiddlehousing.com. You could start by downloading the ARP missing middle housing document, and I'll provide that link in a follow-up PDF. But I think it's absolutely necessary that all of us, whether we're planners, architects, decision makers, developers, the mayor, the city manager, county board of supervisor, to really play a role in delivering these much needed housing choices. And I just encourage you all to step up and utilize your expertise to help provide these solutions that are really needed in every corner of the country. And reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect, and we can sort of start a robust missing middle conversation on LinkedIn at Daniel Perolik. But I think the Maryland Department of Planning and the Smart Growth Network for hosting me again. And I hope to run into all of you soon and dive into more of these important subtopics.
Great. And thanks again, Dan. This concludes today's webinar, Missing Middle Housing Solutions, Proven Techniques to Deliver Impactful Small-Scale Housing. I'd like to offer my sincerest gratitude again, Dan. Thanks for joining us today. You provide a lot of great insight on these important issues, so it's always a good time having you. Thank you to everyone who attended. And as always, thank you to John Coleman, who helps keep our webinars running smoothly. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted online. When you exit today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so we can continue to improve these webinar experiences for you. Only those who indicated that they require a certificate during registration will receive one via email following the webinar. And on top of that, please keep an eye out on your inbox for details on future webinars sponsored by the Maryland Department of Planning and the Smart Growth Network, including our next Housing Month webinar on Thursday, November 21st at 1 p.m., Zoning for More Equitable Housing Options, Lessons from Charlottesville, Virginia. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.